Okay, types of programming error. There are three types of programming error. There is the syntax error, logic error, and the runtime error. Now, the syntax error is an error in which a program does not follow the rules of the programming language. And I've shown some examples here, and you can see here in this example the assignment operator is missing, the equals to sign is missing, x equals to console.readline, that's the correct syntax. So this should give an error, right? This is another example of an incorrect syntax because this variable called name has this value Umar, and this value Umar does not have quotes around it. So this is also a syntax error. Okay, logic error is an error in the logic of the program that causes it to behave not as desired, not as intended. For example, I have written this function here, calculate average, which is taking two parameters, num1 and num2, and it's returning a value which has a data type single, right? And remember, single, is basically Visual's basic data type of representing real numbers. Okay, so the function, from the name it's evident this function is going to calculate the average. But let's take a look at what's happening inside the function. The function, instead of adding the numbers num1 plus num2, it is subtracting the numbers num1 minus num2. And what's going to happen is the value that is going to be calculated and returned by this calculate average function is not going to be what we are expecting. For example, if num1 is 3 and num2 is 5, so ideally the average should be what? 3 plus 5 divided by 2, which should be 4. But when we take a look at the function here, it's going to subtract. So it's going to subtract 3 minus 5, which is going to give us minus 2. Minus 2 divided by 2 is going to give us minus 1. So this function is going to return a value minus 1 instead of the expected value of 4. So this is a logic error. And these are difficult to detect. Okay, so it's an error in the logic of the program that causes the program to behave not as intended. Let's move on. Then comes the runtime error. Now, runtime error is an error that causes the program execution to crash or freeze. What that means is when you start running your program and the program starts running, it is compiled, it is translated, and then it starts running on the computer, something happens that causes the program to crash or freeze. And let's take a look at an example of why that happens. See, you think you have a file on your hard disk, right, by the name of a2.txt. This is what you're thinking. So you write this piece of line in Visual Basic. You say dim read file as new io.streamreader, and you give the file path here, and you try and open this file. When you try and open this file, the system is going to go to this location in the hard disk, right? It's going to go to the C folder and it's going to look for a file called a2.txt, and it's not going to find that file there. So you're basically trying to read from a file which does not exist. In that case, the program is going to crash or it is going to freeze. Now this is something that we deal with in P4, right? In P4 we have something called the try catch block, right, where you try and catch exceptions. If something like this happens and you put it in the try catch block, then the program is not going to crash. But that's for P4. As of now, what we need to understand is that a runtime error can occur when you try and read a file from the hard disk and that file does not actually exist. So that will cause the program to crash. Another example of where we can have a runtime error is when you try and divide a number by 0.